Hello and welcome to Vibration Shift. So we're going to be talking about what to start noticing. You're doing these warp gates, you're doing them on safety, and your unconscious mind is going to be doing energy work at an extremely fast pace. Really, really fast. And but it's also going to be gentle. And it's also, since it's happening in your unconscious mind, you're not necessarily going to have awareness of what specifically is clearing. You're going to clear so you feel it initially, right? And then you're just gonna let go off in the background. That's the whole point. It's the whole point for your unconscious mind to do it, so you can then just kind of sit back and enjoy the benefits. But you want to pay attention to some of the stuff that you're getting, because you really want to make that link up that you're kicking off the warp gates and you're creating your change. The warp gates, it's a great kind of reference of what your unconscious mind does, but it's really your unconscious mind that's doing it, and you got to get that you're kicking that off. Right? And the magic is you and your unconscious mind. So you come back to it. Because the worst thing I want you to do is kick up a couple warp gates, feel great, and then get sidetracked and go off on another thing, and then stop getting all the amazing change. Stop really opening you up to the magic of you. So some things to pay attention to. Obviously, the first thing is safety. So notice, and it can go either way. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to feel like, oh, I feel amazingly more safe. You might have not felt you had any issues with safety. Like you might not have felt like, well, I didn't feel like I wasn't safe, right? And then all of a sudden you start feeling those issues with safety of like, wow, you start noticing all the different areas where you didn't feel safe. And this is actually good. This is a really good thing, because your unconscious mind, like I said, these are death programs, so it kind of hides this from you. So you're not necessarily going to know it's in play until we start unwinding it. So that's the situation where you might all of a sudden start feeling like your safety of like, wow, I didn't notice, I really didn't feel safe. But you also start noticing like kind of the boost from that too, of where you're like, wow, I didn't feel safe here, but now you can start having agency in that area and start taking action. So it can be either or. It could be that one, you just start feeling a lot more safe of like, you start feeling safe to do stuff. Like that's the other thing, you'll start doing more. Because you might actually start feeling safer and then go out, do more, and then not feel as safe because you're now doing more. So that's another thing that you really want to pay attention to, is like, are you starting to do a lot more? Are you engaging more people? Are you like thinking about stuff that you wouldn't think about before? Are you doing stuff you wouldn't do before? Are there dreams that are starting to show back up that like they were important to you, but you kind of stuffed them away, but now you're kind of paying attention to them of like, hey, yeah, I did want to do that. So it's like either your mind's starting to allow you to go places that you weren't allowed to go before, which is awesome, super huge, because if your mind gets locked down to where you can't go, you won't even know you're not going there. So that's the worst. That's what we're unhooking. That's what we're taking out, to where you can start really like discovering and exploring the awesome places that you really do want to go, where you are here to go to, you're here to do. So that's something to notice, because you want to build that feedback loop of like, yeah, I'm cracking it open. So notice, is there more things you're starting to notice that you're doing? One, definitely doing. You might just actually feel like, oh my gosh, I've been putting that off for so long, and I've been doing it. I didn't even notice I was doing that. Can totally happen where you just don't even know you're doing it. You're just like, oh my gosh, I just picked it up and did it. It was before, you just got to notice the times of like before you're like, oh man, I don't want to do it. And now you find yourself just doing it effortlessly. Those ones are awesome. Definitely notice those ones. Then also notice you're going to have a change, because we initially started with parents. Notice how you feel about your parents and if that's changed. Because I mean, I've had like people that have gone through that where they like didn't want anything to do with their father. Absolutely nothing. Hated them. You know, just nothing to do with them. I want nothing to do with them. Hate them, right? To where even within a week, all of a sudden she felt like, oh, well, he's got good traits. He's got good things. He's got abilities. He's got traits. He's got ability. So first it was like, just shut off everything dad. And now all of a sudden, because that's the danger, is because even your dad breathes. Even your dad has dreams. So if you shut everything off, you shut that off too. You shut off all that. That's why it's so detrimental to have like the just global of like, hate mom, hate dad, everything about them is terrible. Because it isn't. They're beings of light, and there's so much to them. There might be specific traits you don't like, specific events you don't like, but them as a blanket don't like. That's the danger of it. So notice that of like, has that changed? You don't need to make it change. Just notice of like, how do you feel about your parents? Is there a more flexibility of like, oh, I could kind of see that they maybe had some things rough. That, oh, maybe it wasn't easy peasy for them either, right? You know, so just notice changes with that. Or it could even be like, hey, I thought everything was fine with mom and dad, and now I kind of see them as jerks, right? Because there is that part too of like, because like when you're a child, you can't confront that maybe your treatment wasn't, the best it could have been. Let's make it real gentle, right? You can't confront that. So you might have just seen like, oh, well, I've just got to accept whatever my mom and dad do. And now you're able to start seeing like, you know what? I kind of don't like some of their behaviors, right? That's a huge change. That is a change. That is positive to where you're actually starting to notice of like, hey, wait a second. Maybe there were some parts that they did that weren't so kosher, right? And that allows you to start having that new interaction. So that's another important thing to notice of like, because we definitely starting with the energetic change to mom and dad. So just notice your feelings towards them of like, so it can be of like, hey, wow, I have some more grace for them. Or it could be like, hey, they're kinds of bummed. There's something about them I don't like, but you need to get that first. You need to get to the place where you see what happened before you can forgive. There's no point forgiving something that you don't see that happen, or be like, oh, there's nothing to forgive, no big deal. That's not actual forgiveness. That's just, suppression, and that's not going to work for you. So just notice where that has happened, where there's been changes there. Also, if you have kids, they notice that dynamic has changed as well, because they've picked up kind of like they did the energetic chain like you did to your parents, and you're their blueprint. So when you rewrite your blueprint, you're going to be giving them a huge opportunity to rewrite theirs, because they based it on yours. They're energetically hooked into you. They're chained into you too. When you start letting them go to your mom and dad, it's going to give them the opportunity to do it too, where they're like, hey, wait, I want to let it go. And you want them to. It's not like you're taking love away from your kids. It's the chain. Like you're taking an imprisonment. He's giving your kids a chance to say, hey, I'm going to let go of that energetic chain. And since you're actively doing with your parents, when your kids let go of a chain to you, you'll let it go too, as opposed to recreate it. You won't be able to recreate it to them, but instead of recreating something similar, you'll be like, oh yeah, let's let those go. So that's a double win, as to where you actually just see if there's a change happening with your children, because that's definitely possible. Because you're going to your parents, and it's kind of like that feedback loops. That's another thing to notice, see if that's happening. And then we mentioned a little bit of it, but a big one is like, are you doing more, or even considering to do more? Stuff that you weren't considering to do, but you are considering to do it now. So notice if there's some flexibility there that you're considering to do more. That's a big one. And then also just emotions. Like, are you allowed to have them now? Like, is there more freedom to have some emotions, whether it's positive or negative, but is there a greater freedom that you can have some emotions now? Because you might have had it all locked down and you just weren't allowed to feel. So that's another thing, is like, are you allowed to have some more emotions? And then obviously, do you feel better? I mean, that's another possible thing of like that. You're just starting to feel more free and you're feeling better. I mean, notice that of like, yeah, I am feeling better, right? It doesn't mean like, oh, your whole life is perfect, but are you having moments where you're feeling better? Where you're enjoying something more, where you're feeling a greater freedom. So notice those, because those are huge ones that will push you forward to like, oh yeah, I want to keep doing this because it's opening up. I'm feeling better. That's the win. So just a couple things to pay attention to, because this is going to happen on an unconscious level, on a very deep level. It's important for you to consciously start seeing it working in your life, seeing how it's working. You don't need to push it. You don't need to make it work. You're just going to be observing it, because then that starts waking you up to the magic of you, of like, because you're not doing it, you're just watching. You're like, wow, man, I'm pretty awesome. I'm kicking butt. So I hope you get that gift. It will be coming for you. You just got to pay attention to what's happening in your life, the change that's occurring. You don't need to push the change. Just notice that like, hey, stuff's starting to happen. I'm starting to change, because then you're going to start waking up to the amazing of you. And that's the point. And until we talk again, have a blessed day or a blessed night.